everybody. This is Morgan, and welcome to the PS We Expire podcast. On this podcast, we talk about all sorts of things, but really what it gets down to is like, how do we have these honest, vulnerable conversations that all of us desperately want to have in our real lives, but sometimes we lack the language to have these conversations, or maybe we lack the spaces in order to have these conversations, or the relationships to have these conversations. So let this be a place where your curiosity is piqued, where you develop greater self-awareness, and where you fall more and more in love with your life. So on this episode, which is episode number 50, by the way, 50, hey-o, episode number 50, I am talking with you about self-love. It's great when people tell you to love yourself more, but how do you actually do that? Where's the practical advice? So I'm giving you 3 practical pieces of advice to develop greater self-love. And then on the back half of the show, I share why I care about this so much. Why do I care about self-love? Who cares? Blah, blah, blah. I care, and I'll tell you why. If you happen to, I'll give you a little hint. If you happen to grow up in a religious household or religious environment where you were told that you are bad and that you are sinful, I will address that in the second half of the episode. But thank you for joining me for this week's episode. Please take just a minute to rate and review this show. I would greatly appreciate it. And I am so glad that you're here. I hope you enjoyed this episode. So there's a lot of people who will tell you, just love yourself more. Love yourself more and your problems are going to vanish, and it's all about self-love. And that's great. I'm a huge proponent for loving yourself more. What is not helpful, though, is just having someone tell you to love yourself more and not knowing how to actually do that. Like, how do I love myself more? Great advice, terrible on the application part. So today I want to talk about, how do you love yourself more? How do you learn how to just have so much self-compassion and have self-awareness lead to such a deep love and trust for yourself that it trickles out into all your other relationships. It trickles out into just how you live your life. I really do believe that the greatest indicator of whether or not you will be hateful and judgmental to other people, toward other people, is if you are hateful and judgmental towards yourself. I really recently have been really digging into the work of Richard Schwartz, and he is the one who created internal family systems. So he was a therapist for a really long time and saw this pattern with his clients where they had all these different parts of themselves, which were typically a lot younger than what your current age is, and that they would fight with each other. But that underneath it all, there was this capital S self that could become the leader of that internal family of all the different parts of yourself. And I have found so much joy and relief in studying his work. And so the first thing that I want to talk about today to actually increase your self-love has to do with this kind of understanding of all these parts of ourselves that typically are at war with each other, or, prevent us from doing certain things, or, cause a lot of anxieties or self-destructive behaviors or dysfunctional relationships. So the first thing is really, really profoundly important, and that is to make friends with your critical voice. Now, how is this any different than what other people are saying about love yourself more? The big difference is that many times you will get the advice on how to silence that critical voice, how to change the negative self-talk, how to capture it and turn it into something different. And I think that there's a lot of really great techniques with that. But if you do that without first asking some questions of that critical voice, you are just going to compound the problems, because you just push the concerns of these parts of yourself away, and you push them down and you ignore them and you silence them. So to become friends with that critical voice is to start to ask questions. So questions like, What do you need? If you're asking yourself this, what do you need? When that little voice pops up that tells you that you're a failure or that you're no good or that you're not going to be able to succeed at anything or that you did a really bad job with that or why did you say that? Instead of just trying to silence that voice, why don't you ask it, what do you need? What do you need to tell me? And then actually listen. Listen for the answer. You can ask yourself, what is this good for? What is this critical voice good for? What is this part of me that is desperately trying to protect me? What is it good for? How has it actually been a tool to keep me safe? I will share with you um, just a little simple thing. I was doing this little meditative exercise and trying to introduce this concept of working with my parts into my meditation routine. And the other morning I was finding these little parts of myself that felt different things. And often, if you have a part that is really loud and tries to protect you from things, the other parts don't like that part. And they get mad at it as well. And so I found this part of myself that was like 12 or 13 that felt like she had to keep everything together, that she had to be the one to make sure that everybody was doing what they were supposed to be doing. She had to keep all the moving pieces exactly where they needed to be. And that she was really overwhelmed. She was really overwhelmed, really burnt out, and very, very, very tired. So it was like anytime I would try to introduce a new way of thinking about things or this new idea for my business, this part would get very tired because she thought that it was her responsibility to take care of everything. Now, when in IFS and internal family systems, when you discover a part of yourself and you find out how old they are, typically there is maybe not just a single event, but there is an event in your life or circumstances in your life that contribute to yourself at that age having to be doing more than what they're capable of and coping in ways that they wouldn't normally cope, or that they have to take care of things that maybe at that age they shouldn't have to take care of. So there was something for me when I was 12 or 13 that bumped me into this hyper responsibility, of like, I need to make sure that I took care of things. And I had a really great conversation with that part of me to tell her, like, oh, actually, I'm 40 and you don't have to worry about that anymore. You don't have to take care of that stuff anymore. And I can handle it. I can manage that. And if you don't have to do that, if you don't have to be hyper vigilant and hyper responsible, what would you like to do? And this is where this part comes in, where we ask, what is it good for? So what are these parts of us that keep us hyper vigilant or keep us hyper responsible, or, even destructive behaviors? We can ask ourselves, what has this been good for? And often when we listen for the answer of that, we have so much compassion directed toward that part of ourselves that tends to cause us to get into these spirally critical places or these fearful places. This is a fantastic way to start to change the amount of compassion and love that you have for yourself. Because think about it like this, like if there is this critical voice inside of you that you are always trying to silence, what are you telling yourself? You're telling yourself that how you feel doesn't matter. You're telling yourself that this critical voice needs to just go away and be quiet, which means that you're telling part of yourself somewhere that their needs don't matter. So when you start to open up this conversation between yourself and these parts of yourself, is when you can have so much love and compassion. Because as I saw myself as a 12 or 13-year-old, I had this overwhelming sense of empathy and compassion for this part of myself, because I thought, man, if I was, actually 12 or 13 trying to deal with the things in my life that I'm dealing with as an adult, that would be very overwhelming. that of course that would be super overwhelming and hard, and that there would be so much resistance anytime I introduced any new change. It would cause an internal rupture of this carefully contained system that has been put in place by my inner 12-year-old. And what a beautiful thing for us to have compassion directed toward those parts of ourself, instead of silencing, instead of pushing down, instead of shh, just be quiet already, stop saying things like that. If we don't ever listen to those parts, what we are effectively doing is pressing down or depressing parts of ourself, which only can end up in feeling dysfunctional in our lives, feeling like we're disconnected from our lives, feeling depressed, feeling like we don't want to be in our lives if we continue to push those voices down. So that's the first thing, is to make friends with that critical voice, because most of the time that critical voice is actually going to be pretty young. Number two is learn to tell the truth. For my guess is that it's a minority of you that are just wired to speak your mind. And God bless you for that, because I am not like that at all. And I have, there's a great deal of I wouldn't say jealousy, but like admiration for people that have just been allowed to say how they really feel. For the rest of us, poor poor souls who have learned to kind of quiet our needs, and to make sure that everybody else is always feeling okay, and to make sure that everybody else's needs are taken care of, that there is a larger part of us that, doesn't really say how we're feeling, because we don't want to rock the boat. We just want to make sure that everybody's okay, and we just want to keep the peace. That we're maybe super scared of any kind of thing that resembles conflict. And depending on how you grew up, depending on your relationship with your immediate family, most especially, it may have been really important for you to do that. It may have been really important for you to keep the peace. It may not have been tolerated, or it may not have been encouraged for you to speak your mind. It may not have been encouraged for you to share your opinion, or to say when something didn't feel good to you or didn't feel right to you. I mean, many of us, especially, I think, that grew up in like the 80s and 90s, it was gentle parenting wasn't even a thing. Asking your kid really like how they felt about stuff wasn't really a thing. It was kind of like a my way or the highway kind of parenting mentality. And I guess I shouldn't say that like across the board that's how it was, but like everybody I knew, that's kind of how we grew up. And it coming into this different realm of where not only are we adults now, that we need to say and can say what we really feel, and we can tell the truth, and we can be honest about those things. But there's also a part of it where we have to learn how to navigate when someone's upset with us. We have to learn how to navigate when somebody's feelings are hurt as a result of the thing that we said. And it doesn't mean that anything has gone wrong. It doesn't mean that you did anything wrong just because they don't like what you said. Obviously, this is most difficult in our closest relationships, but I have discovered that when we don't speak honestly, and this doesn't mean unkindly, so always bring along kindness with your honesty, obviously, but when you can speak honestly, even if the other person is upset, it fosters deeper intimacy. It fosters a deeper relationship and deeper connection, because you're being vulnerable and you're showing how you really feel. And this does go along with number one. So when we learn how to stop silencing any inner voice that we have, but particularly a critical voice, a critical inner voice, when we learn how to listen to all the needs that are coming up in ourselves, and that we start telling the truth about that, there is so much freedom and love that comes with that. I would recommend that we do this in order. So I think we do harm to ourselves when we go straight to number two and we are honest without doing the introspective work in number one, because then we really can like be destructive in our relationships unnecessarily when we're not doing the work ahead of time to like unpack what part of myself is saying this? What part of myself doesn't like this dynamic in this relationship, whether it's platonic or romantic, or familial with, parents or siblings, or aunts and uncles, what part of myself does get really nervous about being honest and knowing that somebody's not going to like what I say? What part of myself is like that? So that's the second one, is learn to tell the truth. I a really good example of this, like just a simple example would be like, what if you became so committed to telling the truth that even something like, if you are walking down the street and someone asks you for money, and instead of saying, they say, "Can I have $1?" Instead of saying, "I don't have any," or "I don't have any change on me," and you actually do. What if you said, they said, "Do you have any change?" And what you said was, "Yes, but I don't want to give it to you." I mean, what would that be like? What would that be like for us to be not unkind? I'm not giving it to you. No, not unkind. But if we were just honest, what if we were radically honest in our lives? Can you imagine how freeing that is? Because then there is no conflict between how you feel on the inside and what you're saying on the outside. There's no shame or guilt in the same way that comes with, saying something that is not true. What would that be like? It's just a really simple example, but you can start to find opportunities in your life where ordinarily you might, kind of like beat around the bush or not quite tell the truth all the way, and take the opportunity to learn how to develop that muscle. The more that we tell the truth, the more trust we develop with ourselves. And trust is maybe not synonymous with love, but it's definitely walks hand in hand with love. So if you want to develop more love for yourself, develop some self-trust. And one of the best ways to do that is by telling the truth. And the third thing is to try new things. This may seem very counterintuitive, because if we try new things and we fail at them, let me rephrase that. When we try new things and we fail at them, so if we try new things, we will inevitably fail in big or small ways. It's just part of the learning process. If we have a habit of criticizing ourselves when we fail at things, trying new things is just a really great way to discover those parts of you that are really critical of yourself. So when you try something new and you feel that criticism come up, or you feel the anxiety come up, or you feel the nervousness about it come up, that's a fantastic way to finally address those things that maybe under different conditions would not have bubbled to the surface. This is what I love so much about trying new things. Not only do I love trying new things because there is a promise in there of finding something that is so exciting and fun to do, which sometimes you don't know until you just try it. Like maybe it sounds fun and you try it and you're like, "Oh, actually, this isn't for me." But a lot of times you'll just be like, "Well, that sounds kind of cool. Like, I'll try it." And you find something that you really love doing, whether it's painting or, thrifting or skydiving or whatever it is. You just try it. And when you can develop the habit of checking in with yourself and listening to all those parts of yourself that say how they feel about what you're doing, and you develop compassion and empathy and a good relationship with those parts, then trying something new becomes it becomes part of the adventure, is the introspection that comes alongside with trying new things. And that's what I discovered the most, I think, when I started my business. For my first business, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. Like, literally didn't know. I didn't know anything. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know anything about marketing. I didn't know. I mean, I knew a little bit about bookkeeping, but I didn't know much about that. I didn't know really anything about design other than like what kind of looked good. In my former life before this, I was an interior designer for 6 years. And what I loved the most about starting that business was that it just became this like avenue of self-discovery. So yeah, the thing that I was doing was fun, but I found so much pleasure in being challenged all the time to learn more about myself. It was like, wow, I didn't know that I could do that. I didn't know that I could figure that out. I didn't know that I was going to be good at this. I didn't know that I was capable of this. Look at this. I figured this out after trying and trying and trying and trying and trying, I figured this out. So trying something new is like just one of the best ways to develop so much self-love, because it's like you become proud of yourself. It's almost like when you see your kid who you knew was like super nervous about the Christmas program because they had a tambourine solo or whatever, and you see them up on their little stage during their Christmas program and they're like into it and they have it figured out. You are so proud of them because you know how they felt about it, how much work they put into it, and then they're rocking their tambourine solo. Okay. That's a kind of a cheesy example, but you basically get to the point where you're doing the same thing with yourself, where you're seeing all these parts of yourself that feel nervous about doing this thing. And you get to lead yourself through these new experiences and be really proud of yourself for who you became and what you were able to accomplish and what you learned and the skills that you developed on the other side. So those are my 3. This is how to love yourself more. Now, I want to give a special note to those of you who grew up in a high demand religion or perhaps a high control religion that centered around this message of sinfulness. So this is why this topic of self-love is so important to me, because when I became an adult and I started to sift through and unpack many of the beliefs that I was given as a child, this was one of the most damaging, was this belief that at my core, I was bad. I don't think that you necessarily have to grow up in a religious system to have been taught that at your core you're bad. Maybe you just had parents that decided to tell you that or demonstrate that to you. But I do think that it is especially insidious when you grow up in a religious household, that the being told that you're bad is boxed in a package of that's the most loving thing that you could hear. Being told at your core that you're no good is extremely damaging. So many of these things that I talk about with developing self-love come from this lens of, as I started to ask really big questions about my faith and started to take some things apart and examine them more closely, this was one of the more damaging beliefs that I was handed. Now, when I was in high school, I was very, very devout Christian, evangelical Christian. And I grew up in Utah. So as you can imagine, the religious minority was not evangelical Christian. The religious, or majority, I mean, the religious majority was LDS or Mormon. And I often would sit at, lunch with my LDS friends and try and talk to them about why I was right and why what I believed was the right way to believe, and that they, here are the holes in your beliefs and this is why you should believe what I believe. And a good friend of mine was also evangelical Christian, and so she and I teamed up a lot and would meet with our friends and meet with Mormon missionaries. And I remember, I will never forget this. We had a lot of times, like, we would bargain with our Mormon friends where we would say, like, okay, if you come to youth group with me, I'll meet with your, elders or your Mormon missionaries, and we can, like, exchange ideas and exchange beliefs and try and convince the other person to come over to the other side, essentially. And so I was in high school, and my friend and I, we made an exchange with one of our friends. And so we went over to her house to meet with her and 2 sister missionaries. And we were, having a nice time talking together. And my friend's mom was there as well. And not my evangelical friend, but my LDS friend, her mom was there as well. So my friend and I, who were evangelical Christians, were, giving the spiel about the gospel. And one of our, like, hard-hitting points was that the heart is deceitful, that that this message of total depravity which means that like when you're born, this is the message of this, that when you're born a sinner, that you're born an enemy of God, and it's only um through having a relationship with Jesus that you can become not an enemy of God but a child of God. Now, I recognize now as an adult that that is still just one brand of Christianity, and so there are many people that are in the Christian faith, regardless of denomination, who do not have that belief. And that's great. So, but the belief that we had, the belief that I had was that at my core, I was rotten, rotten sinner, dirty, rotten sinner, and that that's why we needed Jesus. So I shared this verse, which is Jeremiah 17:9, that says, "The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it?" And so that was like one of our hard hitting points, was like, you need Jesus, because without Jesus, you are rotten. Now, I don't remember really anything about our conversation other than trying to drive home that point. But then the next day, my LDS friend brought me a letter that her mom had written. And in that letter, she said, basically, like, this belief that you have about being, rotten at your core is not supported in other places, even in the Bible. And she wrote out front and back, verse after verse after verse after verse, that said the exact opposite of the point that I was trying to make. Now, why am I telling you this? Like, other than the fact that if you are, grew up with this kind of mindset, and it's really difficult for you to get out of this, like this kind of like mucky mire of shame, because that's what you've been told, is that at your core you're bad. I just want to point out that somebody told you that. Somebody told you to look at those verses. Somebody told you that you're bad. Just as easily, there is support even within, the most sacred texts, that that's not true. So for some of you, the critical voice that you have inside of you that tells you that you're bad, you think is God's. And it's not. What is at our core is the you that is connected to truth, to love, to the understanding that we are all connected. The part of you that is wise, the part of you that knows, the part of you that is compassionate and kind towards all the parts of yourself and also to others. And that's the part that we listen to as we develop self-love. It's funny that it's not really that we're learning how to love ourselves more, but it's almost like we're learning to get in touch with that part that always knew how to do that all along. Many times I've thought about self-improvement. I don't really love that term very much, because at our core, there's nothing to improve. There's nothing to improve. Like, you're already 100% valuable and worthwhile. And that doesn't mean that all the stories that we've been told, all the stories that we tell ourselves, like, don't play a part in our behavior and our choices. They absolutely do. But what I'm saying is that beneath all of that is not a bad person. Beneath all of that is not a critical voice. Beneath all of that is the thing that binds all things together, which is love. And so we're just doing work to learn to hear that voice. We're learning to let that voice be the leadership in our lives. We're learning to let that be the thing that enables our deep connection with other people. That is the thing that enables us to create a life that that we just feel completely lit up by. This is the work, is to find that to re-find that. Because we all had access to that when we were kids, like no problem. And then things start happening that put layers between our awareness and that part of ourself that is real. So thank you for joining me for this episode. There isn't really any greater adventure and greater effort that is worth your time than navigating your internal life. Because when we get to that point where we have so much inner peace and self-compassion, then any of the chaos that happens out here in our experience and in our circumstances doesn't affect us in the same way because we have inner peace. All right. So that's it for today. But before we go, P.S.